Hey guys, so in this video I'm going to talk to you a little bit about functional programming and why I like functional programming. Now, before we even start talking about functional programming, I need to tell you that this is not me saying that I don't like object-oriented programming. I actually have this really nice conundrum that I asked a lot when I was looking for my current job. I would ask people working at the company to give me an example of when it makes more sense to use object-oriented programming over functional programming. And I did that because almost everybody started their sentences about, I asked them, how do you feel about React and functional programming, yada, yada, yada. And they all started saying that, oh yeah, I love functional, we're all about functional over here. And I kind of figured that they were on the hype train, like just a few years back, everybody was on the Angular train. And if I asked them, okay, what's your favorite framework, they would all say Angular. And by asking a question like, okay, can you give me an example of when one makes more sense than the other, I found that a lot of them had absolutely no idea. They couldn't answer it because they never thought about it, most of them. Which I think is kind of interesting, because how do you, if you don't know when one is better than the other and you always go with just the one thing, how would you know, like, if you're missing out on something? That's at least my 2 cents on the matter. But the thing about functional programming, which is something that I found, like, this is, apart from it being very testable and apart from all these obvious things, because you know what I'm going to say most likely, composition, it's great that everything's, pure functions, which are great because they're easy to test, and all these obvious things. I'm not even going to start talking about monads and all that stuff because I still am torn between them. I think it's great with monads because I studied a lot to be able to use them in any type of meaningful way. And they're a fairly tricky subject. I think they are a fairly tricky subject. And you're free to disagree with me, but like I go between, like, the power of monads is immense if you know how to use them, but the problem is that most people don't know how to use them, and it can get tricky to educate all of the software world into using them. I'm all for it. If you guys are with me, I'll do it. Like, I will, like, push monads through with everybody else. I'll get on that train with everybody else, because when you use them, and like I have had a few personal projects where the goal was to use monads, and it was absolutely amazing, I have to admit, but it's not for everyone. So these are the obvious typical things about functional programming, but the one thing that I truly would like to touch on, which is, I think, the main reason why I like it so much and why it's more natural to me to use functional programming, or more like, not purist functional programming, but just hear me out now. I saw this amazing talk by this guy who was promoted himself as an object-oriented type of guy. And he said that he was kind of he became more and more sold on functional programming, because when you do functional programming, you start by looking at the small things and you try to keep things as simple as possible. Now, he basically said that he's used to working in an object-oriented fashion, where for the most part you consider the system as a whole. When you're designing your interfaces and your objects and so forth, you think about the system as a big entity. This is also called Domain-Driven Development, which is also a concept that I thought was pretty great for a long time, until I started realizing something. I realized that I'm not perfect. That was a shocker for me as well. I know, right? I mean, who would have thought? Because when I realized I wasn't perfect, and I realized that it was very difficult for me to foresee all the possible things that can change and need to be considered and maybe even planned for, which is the way that you would, in theory, have to think, or rather that's the way that you very naturally have to think when you're doing things at an object in a truly domain-driven way. And I cannot even understand where this comes from. I mean, back in the day, we didn't do really much in terms of agile development. It was about, like, upfront work and months of planning in order to build out the system on paper, and then you would build the thing and then you would ship it and so forth. So it makes a lot of sense that this like UML and object-oriented methodology of working came to pass. And I think it was very natural. However, my brain doesn't work in that way. I'm not saying that you can't do it in object-oriented programming, but I find the functional help is very helpful for me because I simply need things to be simple. When I have a big problem, it's very easy for me to slice it up into small functions and pieces in a functional manner. It's much more difficult for me, at least, to think about in terms of a big system where everything needs to be interconnected. It always ends the same way. It always ends with me overseeing some type of dependency or creating basically a spider web of dependencies and instantiation requirements and all this stuff when I do things purely object-oriented. So maybe that's just me, but basically that's the reason why I love functional, because it makes it very easy for me to slice things up into small movable pieces that have an extremely loose coupling. Because if you're doing functional programming correctly, I can't even fathom something that is more loosely coupled than a massive code base where everything is virtually just a small function. Each piece is just a small function. That's like, at least to me, that's the most modular thing that you can make. I mean, I find it, I see it so often. To my personal enjoyment, I find that very often I will be working on a project for weeks, even months, and I'll never be put in a situation where there's an issue for me, there's a dependency issue, or I have some oversight that I can't very easily fix, because since everything is just a tiny piece, I can start moving these pieces around. I can remove pieces, I can add them. It's very easy, at least for me. It feels like, the best way I can describe it is that it feels like playing with Legos. I can build anything, I can tear it apart and put it back together with relative ease. That's at least my sensation of it. Now, I'm not in any way saying the functional is better than object-oriented programming. I'm just saying that for me personally, it helps a lot when I can start thinking about the small pieces before I need to start thinking about the big ones.